Something was off. The sun was setting over Kingston, but Charles Lawson, a decorated military veteran, felt the weight of an impending storm. Little did he know, today would be the beginning of a nightmare. When racist cops detained him on a quiet street, no one could have predicted the chaos that would unfold next. In just 30 minutes, the FBI would storm the station, and everything would change forever. But before we dive in, where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment and let us know. And if you haven't yet, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. It was just another hot afternoon in the small town of Kingston, where the streets buzzed with the hum of everyday life. The sun was beating down on the cracked sidewalks, casting long shadows across the quiet neighborhood. But today, something was different. At the corner of 4th and Pine, an elderly man named Charles Lawson stood waiting at the bus stop. He had served in the military decades ago, and though his hair was gray and his back was stooped with age, he still carried himself with the pride of a soldier. His worn jacket, adorned with patches from his years of service, fluttered slightly in the breeze. He clutched his cane in one hand, a silent reminder of the battles he'd fought, both in foreign lands and here, at home. But today, Charles wasn't waiting for the bus for a pleasant trip. No, today he was going to visit an old friend, someone who had been like a brother to him in the army. He'd heard rumors about a potential reunion, and he was eager to see if they were true. His steps were slow but steady as he glanced down at the road. As Charles stood there lost in thought, a police cruiser rolled up, the sound of its tires squealing against the pavement. Two officers, Officer Dunn and Officer Mullen, stepped out of the vehicle. Both were young, both were aggressive, and neither of them had the kind of patience that comes with wisdom or understanding. "Hey you," Officer Dunn barked, approaching Charles with a sneer on his face. "What are you doing here?" Charles blinked in confusion. "Just waiting for the bus," he replied calmly. "What's going on, officers? Don't play stupid," Officer Mullen growled, his eyes scanning Charles up and down. "You don't belong here. What's that supposed to mean?" Charles's voice remained steady, but his grip on his cane tightened slightly, a reflex from years of experience in dealing with hostile situations. Officer Dunn smirked. "We're just asking questions, old man. Got a problem with that?" Charles could feel his patience wearing thin, but he knew how to handle situations like this. He was used to dealing with tough situations, just not from people who wore badges. He raised an eyebrow, his voice calm but firm. "I've done nothing wrong. I'm just waiting for the bus. Now, if you'll excuse me, I don't have time for this." Before Charles could take another step, Officer Mullen grabbed him by the arm, yanking him back forcefully. "You're not going anywhere. You're staying right here." Charles winced as the pain shot through his arm, his body betraying him, but his spirit didn't waver. "Let go of me," he snapped, his voice low and dangerous. Officer Mullen's hand tightened, his grip like a vice. "Not until we figure out what you're really up to. You think we're stupid?" It all happened so fast. Before Charles could protest further, the officers were calling for backup, their voices rising in anger, as they shoved him roughly against the squad car. "You think you can just stand around here? You don't belong in this neighborhood. We know your kind." Charles' heart raced. He had been in tight spots before, but this was different. They weren't listening to him. They weren't interested in his side of the story. They were only interested in their power and their prejudice. But just as the officers were preparing to handcuff him, a voice cut through the air like a knife. "Hey," a woman's voice shouted. "What the hell is going on here?" Officer Dunn turned around, and his face twisted into a look of disgust as he saw a black SUV pull up to the curb. A man stepped out, tall with dark sunglasses and a serious expression. His clothes screamed authority, and his gait was that of someone who commanded respect. "You two are making a mistake," the man said, his voice cold and calm. He wasn't shouting, but his presence was powerful enough to make the officers pause. "Release him, now." The officers froze. They had no idea who this man was, but something about him demanded respect. "What's going on here, officer?" The man didn't wait for an answer as he stepped forward, his eyes narrowing at the officers. "Sir, this is none of your business," Officer Dunn muttered, but there was an edge of hesitation in his voice. He wasn't used to being challenged like this, especially not by someone who looked like he had more power than he knew what to do with. The man didn't back down. He simply held up a badge, and the officer's expressions shifted from defiance to uncertainty. "FBI," the man said quietly, his eyes boring into Officer Dunn's. You've just made a serious mistake. Let the veteran go. Now. There was a beat of silence before Officer Mullen finally released his grip on Charles, who staggered back slightly. He blinked, rubbing his sore arm, and looked at the stranger with a mix of confusion and gratitude. The FBI agent didn't wait for the officers to respond. He moved toward Charles, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Are you all right, sir?" he asked gently. Charles nodded, still trying to process what had just happened. "I think I will be," he muttered, still reeling from the rough treatment. But the tension wasn't over. Officer Mullen shot a glance at Officer Dunn, who was clearly frustrated by the sudden turn of events. It was clear that things were far from settled, but there was something about the agent that left them both uncertain, nervous even. "I suggest you head on your way, gentlemen," the FBI agent continued, his voice unwavering. "Before things get complicated." The officers hesitated for a moment longer, then reluctantly backed off, climbing into their cruiser and driving off, leaving Charles and the agent standing in the middle of the street. But as the sound of the cruiser faded into the distance, Charles felt a growing unease in the pit of his stomach. There was more to this than just an arrest. He could sense that something bigger was unfolding. And just as that thought crossed his mind, he heard a noise in the distance, an unmistakable sound of sirens. But these weren't the local police. These were the kinds of sirens that signaled something much more serious, something that would change everything. The sound of sirens grew louder, but it wasn't coming from the police cruiser that had just left. No, this was something else. Something far more menacing. Charles turned his head toward the noise, his old bones tingling with a sense of foreboding. The stranger, the FBI agent, didn't flinch. He simply stood there, his eyes scanning the horizon with a quiet intensity. "Stay close," the agent said, his voice low. "This is far from over." Charles didn't question him. He had learned long ago that when something felt wrong, it usually was. The street was eerily quiet now, the oppressive heat making the air feel thick and suffocating. The world seemed to hold its breath as the wail of sirens pierced the stillness. Without warning, the FBI agent motioned for Charles to follow. They moved quickly, taking a back alley that led to a nearby parking garage. Charles had no idea what was going on, but he could feel the tension in the air, the urgency in the agent's steps. His instincts, honed through years of service, told him that this was more than a simple confrontation with two racist cops. There was something deeper at play here. They reached the parking garage, its concrete structure looming overhead like a silent sentinel. The agent led them into the shadows, and Charles instinctively moved closer to the man. The agent's eyes never stopped moving, scanning the area as if expecting an ambush at any moment. The sirens stopped suddenly, leaving an unnerving silence in their wake. But then, the unmistakable sound of helicopter blades filled the air. Charles looked up, his heart skipping a beat as a blacked-out chopper hovered above the garage, its searchlight cutting through the darkness. The spotlight landed squarely on the parking garage's entrance, illuminating the shadows where they stood. "Stay here," the agent ordered, in a hushed voice. "I've got this." Charles didn't argue. He knew better than to question orders in times like these. He pressed his back against the cool concrete, trying to remain as invisible as possible. But he could feel the weight of what was coming. The chopper's light flickered and swept away, only to return, now focused on the street below. The FBI agent's phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking the silence. He answered it swiftly, his eyes narrowing as he listened. Whatever he heard, it was bad. Charles could see the shift in his demeanor, the slight tightening of his jaw, the coldness in his eyes. He turned to Charles, his face grim. "They're coming," the agent said. "The real threat is about to show itself." Before Charles could ask what he meant, the screech of tires echoed down the alley. The agent raised his hand in warning, signaling for Charles to stay low. A dark SUV sped into the garage, its engine growling like a beast ready to pounce. The vehicle came to a screeching halt, the doors flying open as two men in black tactical gear jumped out, their faces hidden behind visors. The agents moved with precision, scanning the area with military-grade equipment. Charles's instincts kicked in, and he instinctively reached for the pocket of his jacket, where his old service pistol had once been. But it was gone, a relic of his past life. His fingers twitched with the ghost of that power, but he quickly suppressed it. The FBI agent stepped forward, his hand raised in a gesture of authority. "You need to leave, now." The tactical men didn't move. Instead, one of them stepped forward, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "We've been given orders. Step aside." The agent didn't flinch. "Orders from who?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. There was a brief pause, a flash of something dark in the man's eyes, before he responded. "You don't need to know, just stay out of our way." The agent's posture shifted, and Charles could see the tension mounting. This wasn't a simple confrontation anymore, this was something much bigger. The tactical men had no hesitation in their movements, and Charles knew that they weren't here to talk. They weren't here to play by the rule. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," one of the tactical agents sneered, pulling a gun from his holster. But the FBI agent was already moving. With a sudden, sharp motion, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a weapon of his own, a sleek black pistol. It gleamed in the dim light, and in that instant, the tension in the air was almost unbearable. "Put it down," the agent commanded, his voice steely. For a moment, everything stood still. The agents locked eyes, each knowing that this was a battle of wills, a battle for control. Charles could feel the weight of their stares, the unspoken threats hanging in the air. The tension was thick, and for a second, Charles wondered if he was about to witness something far worse than a mere confrontation between law enforcement. But before the situation could escalate, a new sound, an explosion, shook the ground beneath their feet. The blast was deafening, and for a moment, everything was chaos. The lights in the parking garage flickered and went out, leaving only the sounds of confusion and frantic movement. "Get down!" the FBI agent shouted as he pulled Charles into a nearby corridor. They stumbled forward, ducking behind the concrete pillars for cover as another explosion rocked the building. The tactical agents, too, scrambled for cover, their initial composure cracking in the face of the unexpected threat. Charles's heart was pounding in his chest. The noise was deafening, and the air was thick with dust and debris. He could feel the heat from the explosion radiating through the concrete, and he instinctively pressed himself closer to the agent. "What the hell is going on?" Charles gasped, his voice shaky from both the blast and the fear that was quickly creeping into his bones. The agent didn't answer immediately. His eyes were locked on the chaos unfolding around them, his body tense and ready for anything. "This," the agent muttered, "is just the beginning." The ground continued to shake as another blast sent a wave of dust and debris crashing into the parking garage. The dim lights flickered and finally went out, plunging everything into darkness. Charles's heart raced as the sound of feet scurrying across the concrete echoed in the shadows. The faint whispers of hurried footsteps barely audible over the ringing in his ears. "Stay low," the FBI agent ordered in a calm yet urgent tone, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We're not safe here." Charles didn't need to be told twice. His instincts kicked in, and he crouched behind a thick concrete pillar, his fingers gripping his cane tightly, even though he knew it wasn't much of a weapon. But in times like these, you held on to whatever gave you a sense of control. The agent moved swiftly, his body a blur as he shifted between shadows, disappearing and reappearing like a ghost in the night. Charles could barely keep up with him, but he did his best to follow. The explosions had left the entire garage in disarray, the ceiling now groaning under the pressure of whatever had just hit them. "What was that?" Charles asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The agent didn't pause, but his eyes flicked over to Charles, his expression grim. "It's not just the cops, and it's not just us. Whoever they are, they're coming for something big. Something they'll stop at nothing to get." Charles nodded, but his mind was racing. Who would be willing to cause this much destruction just to stop a couple of cops from detaining an elderly black veteran? It didn't make sense, but the look in the agent's eyes told him everything he needed to know. They weren't just dealing with crooked officers, they were up against something far more dangerous. Suddenly, a series of rapid footsteps echoed down the corridor. Charles froze, his muscles tensing as the sound grew louder. The agent motioned for him to stay quiet, his hand on the holster of his gun. But Charles didn't need any further encouragement. The presence of danger was palpable, and his military training took over, bringing clarity in the midst of the chaos. The footsteps stopped just short of where they were hiding. Charles's breath caught in his throat as the shadows stretched further down the hall, covering the unknown figures standing just out of sight. He couldn't see them, but he could feel them. Whoever they were moving fast and with purpose. Then, a voice, a cold, menacing voice, cut through the silence. "I know you're here," the voice said, its tone filled with authority and malice. "You can't hide forever." The FBI agent's grip on his gun tightened, and he motioned for Charles to stay down. Slowly, the agent shifted into position, his movements precise, calculated, but Charles could feel the fear creeping up his spine, his instincts screaming that this wasn't just a simple arrest or misunderstanding anymore. This was something darker, something far more sinister. "Who are you?" The agent's voice was calm but laced with the unmistakable edge of authority. He wasn't going to give in to fear, not now. "Does it matter?" The voice came again, this time closer. "You won't survive long enough to find out." There was a sudden burst of movement, and the agent spun, his gun aimed and ready. A figure appeared from the darkness, but before Charles could even process the motion, the agent was already engaged. The sound of a gunshot echoed through the garage, followed by the thud of a body hitting the ground. Charles flinched at the noise, his hands shaking as the agent stepped back, surveying the scene. The figure on the ground was wearing a dark uniform, military, from the looks of it. But there was something off about him. He wasn't just another tactical agent. His uniform was too polished, too professional. This was someone higher up the chain, someone with resources and training that went beyond anything Charles had seen. The agent turned back to Charles, his eyes narrowed. "We need to move, now." Charles nodded, barely able to keep up as the agent led the way, navigating the maze of pillars and dark corners. The sound of more footsteps followed them, echoing in the distance. Whoever these people were, they were relentless. They weren't stopping. Suddenly, the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open echoed across the garage. The agent signaled for Charles to duck behind another pillar, his body tensing in anticipation. But it wasn't just the footsteps that made Charles's heart race. There was something about the way the door opened, the quietness of it, that told him they weren't dealing with any ordinary enemy. Charles pressed himself flat against the concrete, trying to steady his breathing. The agent was already in position, his gun raised and ready for action. The tension was unbearable, every second feeling like an eternity. Then a shadow moved past the door, tall and menacing. Charles could barely make out the figure, but it was enough. Whoever this person was, they were no stranger to the art of war, and they were looking for something. "Get ready," the agent whispered, his voice calm despite the intensity of the moment. "We can't afford to wait any longer." Charles's pulse quickened. He had been in enough battles to know when the stakes were high. This wasn't just a game. This was a fight for survival. And the enemy wasn't just the cops. It was something far more dangerous. The agent held up a hand, signaling Charles to stay low. He was preparing for something. Charles didn't know what, but he could feel the storm coming. The footsteps grew louder, closer now, and Charles could see the outline of another figure approaching, his silhouette framed by the faint light from the street lights outside. The moment had arrived. Suddenly, the agent moved, his speed almost inhuman as he shot forward. The figure didn't have a chance to react as the agent struck, the crack of a body being thrown against the concrete reverberating through the garage. Charles stood frozen, unsure of what to do. But before he could move, he heard the unmistakable sound of more heavy boots clanging against the concrete floor. The enemies were closing in from all sides. The cold sweat trickled down Charles's back as he crouched behind the pillar, trying to steady his breath. The chaos was escalating at a pace he had never experienced. The garage had become a battleground, and every inch of it felt like a countdown to something even worse. The agent moved like a shadow, fluid and calculating, his eyes darting from corner to corner as the footsteps closed in. Charles could hear them now, multiple sets of boots pounding the concrete, the unmistakable rhythm of soldiers or mercenaries ready for a fight. This wasn't just a police operation anymore. It was a full-blown military engagement, and they were caught in the middle of it. The agent turned to him, his expression unreadable but focused. "Stay here," he said in a low voice. "Don't move until I say so." Charles nodded, trying to ignore the adrenaline that surged through his veins. He had faced gunfire, explosions, and impossible odds before, but this felt different. The enemy wasn't just after him, they were after something bigger. And whatever it was, Charles knew it was tied to the destruction that was unfolding right in front of him. The sound of metal clanging and heavy breathing echoed down the hallway, getting closer. A moment later, two figures appeared in the dim light, their movements calculated and efficient. They didn't look like regular cops or soldiers. These men wore dark tactical gear, but their helmets were more advanced, with sleek visors that concealed their faces. They were part of something far bigger than the local law enforcement. Without a word, they spread out, one moving to the left and the other to the right. Their heads swiveled from side to side as they searched for any sign of movement. Charles held his breath, trying to stay as still as possible. The agent was still watching, poised to strike. Suddenly, one of the figures stopped. He had spotted something. His helmet tilted as he scanned the area with a thermal scope, the red glow lighting up the shadows. Charles's heart skipped a beat. He knew it wouldn't be long before they found them. The agent was already moving, his footsteps barely a whisper as he slid into the shadows, his gun raised and ready. Charles, too, felt the pull of the fight, but he knew better than to act impulsively. The agent had a plan. He was the one in charge now. The figure with the thermal scope turned slowly, his gaze sweeping the dark corner where Charles and the agent had hidden. For a moment the world seemed to pause, the tension hanging in the air like a taut wire, ready to snap at any moment. Then, as if on cue, the agent sprang into action. In one fluid motion, he darted from his hiding place, taking down the man with the thermal scope. Before he could even raise an alarm, the other soldier turned to react, but he was too slow. The agent's pistol flashed, the sound of a single shot ringing out in the silence of the garage. Charles couldn't believe what he was seeing. The agent moved like a force of nature, every motion swift and precise, leaving no room for error. He was a man who had seen too much, who had fought too many battles, and now he was in the middle of another war that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with survival. But the noise had drawn attention. Within seconds, more footsteps echoed through the garage, more soldiers, more weapons. Charles could feel the pressure mounting as the agent took cover behind a nearby car. His mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. Whoever was behind this wasn't just targeting a black veteran. They were targeting something bigger. They were willing to kill, destroy, and dismantle everything to get their hands on it. The agent peeked over the hood of the car, his eyes scanning the area. He was calculating, waiting for the right moment. The soldiers were closing in, their boots ringing out in the quiet like an ominous drumbeat. The agent had only seconds before they reached his position. Charles didn't know what possessed him, but something inside him snapped. He wasn't going to sit by and wait for the agent to fight alone. He had fought in battles where the odds were stacked against him, and he had never been the one to stand down. With a deep breath, his hands, though shaking with the fear and adrenaline coursing through him, gripped his cane tightly as he slowly rose to his feet. Every instinct told him to stay hidden, but he knew that if he didn't do something, the agent would be outnumbered and overwhelmed. Just as a soldier turned the corner, Charles slammed his cane against the side of a nearby trash bin, making a loud clanging sound. The soldier froze, his head snapping in Charles's direction, and in that moment, the agent took advantage of the distraction. The agent's pistol flashed again, the soldier crumpling to the ground without a sound. But the gunfire had alerted more of them, and soon the garage was filled with the sound of multiple enemies closing in from all directions. There was no time left for subtlety. The agent looked at Charles, his eyes steely. "We need to go now," he shouted. Before Charles could respond, the agent moved again, his feet moving faster than Charles had ever seen someone his age move. The agent dived behind a nearby pillar just as more soldiers charged into the garage, their weapons aimed and ready to fire. Charles, feeling the weight of his military training kicking in, grabbed the nearest object, a metal pipe, and ran toward a nearby soldier. His hands shook, but he swung the pipe with all the strength he had left, knocking the soldier off balance and sending him sprawling to the ground. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give the agent time to regroup. The agent fired 2 more shots, taking down 2 soldiers who had been approaching from the left, but their numbers were growing, and the situation was spiraling out of control. Charles could see it in the agent's eyes. They were trapped. "We need a way out," the agent said, his voice steady but urgent. Now, Charles looked around. The garage was closing in around them, the exit sealed, but there was one option left, a fire escape. High above them, a ladder led to the roof. It wasn't ideal, but it was their only chance. "Up there," Charles pointed. Without hesitation, the agent moved, his gun raised as he covered their retreat. The sound of more footsteps reached their ears. They had no time left. The tension in the parking garage was at its peak. The air felt thick, every breath hard to take. The sound of heavy boots and clattering weapons echoed in the background, the soldiers surrounding them like wolves closing in on their prey. But Charles's eyes were locked on the fire escape ladder, high above them. It was their last chance. "We move now," the FBI agent said, his voice tight with urgency. He wasn't asking, he was commanding. Charles didn't hesitate. The fight had drained his body, but his will was stronger than ever. Without a word, he followed the agent's lead, his hands gripping his cane and the metal pipe like a lifeline as they sprinted for the ladder. Bullets whizzed past them, the sharp crack of gunfire making the air tremble. The agent fired back, his movements precise, keeping the soldiers at bay for as long as possible. But the numbers were overwhelming. Charles could feel the rush of adrenaline coursing through him, pushing him forward even though his body screamed with exhaustion. The ladder was within reach, just a few feet away. But then, like a nightmare, the sound of more gunfire exploded from behind them. A bullet grazed Charles's shoulder, and he stumbled. The pain shooting through him, he gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stay on his feet. "Keep going," the agent shouted over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the area. He wasn't stopping, and neither was Charles. With one last burst of energy, Charles reached the base of the fire escape, his hands trembling as he grabbed the metal rung. The agent was right behind him, moving swiftly and without hesitation. They climbed, the sharp metal biting into their hands as they ascended, higher and higher, out of the line of fire. But the enemy was relentless. As Charles reached the top, he could hear the soldiers below, their voices raised in anger as they shouted orders. There was no escape from this. Not yet. The rooftop was dimly lit by a single flickering light, casting long shadows over the cracked concrete. Charles and the agent paused for a moment, catching their breath. They had made it this far, but the danger wasn't over. It never was. "Where do we go from here?" Charles asked, his voice ragged as he looked around. The city stretched out before them, a maze of buildings and streets. But nowhere felt safe. The agent didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned the area, calculating their options. He was no stranger to dangerous situations, but even he could feel the weight of this one. They had made it out of the garage, but the real battle was yet to come. "We have a safe house," the agent said after a beat, "but we need to get there without being seen. We'll be exposed up here for too long." Charles nodded. He didn't have the energy for more questions. His body ached, his mind racing with the events that had just unfolded. He had been caught up in something far bigger than a simple confrontation with racist cops. This was an operation, one that had layers upon layers of secrecy, danger, and intrigue. The agent motioned for Charles to follow him as they moved swiftly across the roof. They ducked low, staying out of sight, moving from one building to the next, hopping across narrow alleys and fire escapes. The sounds of the city filled the air, horns honking, the distant chatter of people on the street. But to Charles, it all felt far away. He was focused on staying alive. As they rounded another corner, Charles suddenly stopped, his instinct screaming at him to take cover. The agent didn't question it. He dropped to the ground, pulling Charles with him. For a moment, everything went still. The sound of a helicopter's blades sliced through the air, and Charles looked up, his heart sinking. The blacked-out chopper from earlier had returned, its searchlight sweeping over the rooftops. It moved slowly, methodically, as if searching for something or someone. "This is bad," the agent muttered under his breath. "They're looking for us." Charles's heart raced as the helicopter's spotlight passed over them. It was only a matter of time before they were spotted. They had no more time to waste. The agent motioned again, and they sprinted across the rooftop, the helicopter's searchlight flashing over them once more. They ducked behind another building, hearts pounding in their chests, and then just as suddenly, the helicopter veered off course and disappeared into the distance. For a moment, there was silence. Charles stood, chest heaving, his eyes still scanning the horizon. The agent turned to him, his face still stoic, but with a flicker of relief in his eyes. "That was too close," the agent said, his voice steady but with a hint of weariness. "But we're not safe yet, not by a long shot." Charles nodded. He knew the fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. As they continued to move, the agent's phone buzzed in his pocket. He answered it without hesitation, his voice low and urgent. "Agent Matthews," he said, his eyes darting around the rooftop. "What's the status?" There was a brief pause as the person on the other end spoke, and Charles could hear the faintest edge of panic creeping into the agent's voice. "Understood," Agent Matthews said, his voice clipped. "We've got a bigger problem on our hands than we thought. They've activated the extraction plan. We need to move faster." "Extraction?" Charles asked, his voice hoarse. "What are you talking about?" But before Agent Matthews could respond, a sharp noise pierced the air, a gunshot, followed by the screech of tire. Charles turned to the agent, his face pale. "They're here." The agent's eyes hardened. "We're not running anymore. We're taking this fight to